US President Joe Biden and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping held critical talks today in a virtual summit amid rising tensions between the two countries on several fronts. Taiwan and human rights violations by China were Biden's top focus. On Taiwan, President Biden struck a balancing act. On one hand, saying that the United States maintains its long-standing policy of recognizing the One China policy guided by Taiwan Relations Act. But the president also warned that the United States opposes any unilateral efforts to change the status quo of Taiwan. Chinese state media reported that President Xi Jinping warned that United States support for Taiwanese independence is like playing with fire, and further said that some people in the United States intend to use Taiwan to control China. President Biden also brought up concerns against human rights violations by China in regions like Xinjiang, Tibet and Hong Kong, and discussed the importance of a free and open Indo-Pacific region. President Biden was also clear on the need to protect American industries from China's unfair trade and economic practices. Climate change was also brought up. And the two leaders spoke about the importance of addressing the global energy supply crisis. Earlier in the day, in his opening remarks, President Biden called for candid discussions, said that the two countries need to establish common sense guardrails in order to prevent conflicts.
It seems to me we need to establish some common sense guardrails to be clear and honest where we disagree and work together where interests intersect, especially on vital global issues like climate change. None of this is a favor to either of our countries, what we do for one another, but it's just responsible world leadership, and you're a major world leader, and so is the United States. How our bilateral relationship evolves seems to me will have a profound impact not only on our countries, but quite frankly, the rest of the world. We have a responsibility to the world as well as to our people. And I think it's very important, as I've told other world leaders when they ask about our relationship, is that we have always communicated with one another very honestly and candidly, and we never walk away wondering what the other man is thinking. And I think that's an important ingredient for this relationship, to be open and candid in terms of our relationship. And I think it's important we communicate honestly and directly to one another about our priorities and our intentions.
President Xi called for greater cooperation and communication between the two countries.
Right now, both China and the United States are at critical stages of development, and humanity lives in a global village, and we face multiple challenges together. As the world's two largest economies and the permanent members of the UN Security Council, China and the United States need to increase communication and cooperation. We should each run our domestic affairs well and, at the same time, shoulder our share of international responsibilities and work together to advance the noble cause of world peace and development. This is a shared desire of the people of our two countries and around the world, and the joint mission of Chinese and American leaders. A sound and steady China-US relationship is required for advancing our two countries' respective development and for safeguarding a peaceful and stable international environment, including finding effective responses to global challenges such as climate change, which you referenced, and the COVID pandemic. China and the United States should respect each other, coexist in peace, and pursue win-win cooperation. I stand ready to work with you, Mr. President, to build consensus, take active steps, and move China-US relations forward in a positive direction. Doing so will advance the interests of our two peoples and meet the expectation of the international community.
The two leaders had spoken twice on phone before this since President Biden took office, and with President Xi refusing to travel abroad due to the ongoing pandemic, an online virtual meeting was the only substitute for an in-person summit.
Good to see you, Mr. President, and
And now for more on this, political risk analyst Ross Feingold joins us live from Taipei. Thank you so much for joining us. Now on Taiwan, President Biden had to strike a balancing act, saying that the United States maintains its long-standing policy of recognizing the One China policy guided by the Taiwan's Relations Act, also affirming that the United States would not stand for any unilateral attempts of changing the status quo there. How do you assess these statements?
Generally, President Biden repeated what's become the standard U.S. talking points when addressing Taiwan, specifically in front of or in meetings with Chinese leaders or Chinese government officials. So there wasn't too much of a departure. He mentioned the Taiwan Relations Act. He mentioned the 3 joint communiques with China. He mentioned the 6 assurances, which is a set of assurances that the U.S. Gave to Taiwan in the 1980s. So these are all the typical framework, key points of the relationship, whether it's the bilateral U.S.-Taiwan relationship or the trilateral relationship between the U.S., Taiwan, and China. Frankly, I think critics are going to be disappointed, whether that's supporters of Taiwan in the United States, such as in the United States Congress, or even here in Taipei. It's certainly not a great departure from what U.S. officials typically say, and it certainly wasn't an emphatic statement of U.S. support for Taiwan. So rather than say something emphatic, he kind of said what we've come to expect from most U.S. government officials when they address this issue.
Right. Now, we also heard the statement following the meeting from the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs. One thing that they said was that there are no concessions regarding territorial and issues pertaining to sovereignty of China. They also agreed on certain principles, 3 of them being that China and United States should respect each other, peaceful coexistence, and managing their differences. What can you tell us about that?
Well, one of the very interesting things to watch in the aftermath of this meeting is how the official media in China reports it, how statements by spokespersons for different Chinese government agencies relate what occurred, and how that compares to what we see from the White House, the State Department, or U.S. media. Obviously, there's tremendous differences in how these things get reported. On the Chinese side, it's very much for domestic consumption and how to present it to the Chinese people as a very successful meeting from the perspective of the Chinese government and Xi Jinping. The U.S. side, it's just a dramatically different reporting, as opposed to trying to present it as a rhetorical success for President Biden. It's just more of a dry kind of recollection. Here's what Biden said, and okay, we're going to move on to the next issue on the U.S. political agenda, which is probably what the team Biden wants anyway. They want to return to talking about the infrastructure bill that he signed a few hours before the meeting. I mean, clearly the Biden team, they don't want to dwell on China issues because they know inevitably they're going to be receiving a lot of criticism for how they handle it.
Right. Also, President Biden brought up concerns against the human rights violations by China in regions like Xinjiang, Tibet, Hong Kong, discussed the importance of a free and open Indo-Pacific, also discussed the global energy supply chains. How do you see further communication on this going forward?
Well, in the human rights space or Xinjiang, Tibet, Hong Kong, clearly there's little room for any agreement between the United States and China. China has made it abundantly clear they look at this as domestic issues. They're not open to foreign commentary, certainly not by foreign governments. The U.S. will probably continue to periodically issue sanctions against officials from those 3 regions. But I wouldn't expect, just because Joe Biden raised this in the context of a conversation that covered innumerable issues, that the Chinese side is going to change their policies. And I think, again, we see that it gets reported by the Chinese government as the Chinese side emphasized that these are domestic issues and we don't accept any interference from the U.S. side. So I don't expect any movement on that issue. On climate, we have that statement that came out of COP26 from the 2 sides. There's probably going to be some future dialogue. Again, I wouldn't have much hope for any grand agreement in this regard. If they have any kind of agreement, the implementation is likely to take a long time. If it's even implemented, it's certainly another item that would be criticized by Republicans in the United States Congress as well. But it's something that Biden has repeatedly emphasized, that he hopes to have some constructive engagement with China on climate change issues.
All right, Mr. Feingold, thank you so much for joining us with all your inputs on that. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.